My daughter-in-law threw my hand-knit baby blanket into the kitchen trash like it was a dirty paper towel, and my son stood there holding a slice of cake, pretending he had not just watched his mother disappear from his family. I had spent 4 months making that blanket. 4 months of sitting in my quiet living room in suburban Pennsylvania after dinner, the television murmuring to no one, my silver hair pinned back, my reading glasses sliding down my nose, my hands working the same pattern my mother had taught me when I was a girl. Cream yarn, a pale blue border, small even stitches, soft enough for a newborn's cheek. It was for baby Claire, my first granddaughter, Daniel's first child, the little girl my late husband Richard had dreamed about before his heart gave out 2 winters ago. Lauren's baby shower was held on a bright Saturday afternoon in their new house, the kind with white brick, black shutters, and a front porch decorated so carefully it looked more like a magazine cover than a home. I arrived 10 minutes early because women my age still believe early is polite. I wore my navy dress, the one Richard used to say made my eyes look kind, and carried the gift box against my chest as if I were carrying something alive. Inside that box was more than yarn, but no one knew that yet. The living room was full of women in pastel dresses, silver balloons spelling out baby girl, and a dessert table covered with cupcakes no one wanted to touch before pictures were taken. Lauren looked perfect, of course. She always did. Blonde hair in loose waves, pearl earrings, one hand resting on her belly whenever someone lifted a phone for a photo. When she saw me, her smile appeared a half-second too late. "Margaret," she said, not Mom, not Mrs. Ellis, just Margaret, as if I were a neighbor who had dropped off mail by mistake. Daniel gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, then stepped back beside his wife. That small movement told me everything. I placed my gift with the others and waited. For nearly an hour, I watched Lauren open expensive bottles, designer baby clothes, a white noise machine, a stroller that probably cost more than my first car. She praised every gift like it was a treasure. Then she reached mine. She lifted the blanket from the tissue paper, and for one brief second, I thought maybe tenderness would find her. The room went quiet. The blanket unfolded across her lap, soft and careful, and full of every lonely evening I had survived. Lauren pinched the corner between 2 fingers and gave a tiny laugh. "Oh, that's sweet, Margaret. But we're not putting homemade things near the baby." A few women laughed because they did not know what else to do. My son looked down at his shoes. I felt my hands fold together in my lap. Lauren stood, carried the blanket into the kitchen, and dropped it straight into the trash. Then she said, loud enough for me to hear, "Some women don't know when to stop trying to be important." I did not cry. I did not argue. I picked up my purse, looked once at Daniel, and walked out. That night, my phone rang just after 11. Daniel was sobbing so hard he could barely speak. "Mom," he whispered. Lauren threw the blanket away. What was inside it? For a moment, I could not answer Daniel. I stood in the dark hallway of my little townhouse with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to my grown son cry like the boy who used to run to me after a bad dream. The sound should have softened me immediately. A mother's heart is trained to respond that way. But something inside me stayed still. Not cold, not cruel, just still. There are moments when grief becomes so familiar that it stops shaking and starts watching. I looked across the hall at the wicker basket beside my armchair, where a few loose strands of cream yarn still rested from the last night I worked on Claire's blanket. For months earlier, I had found that yarn in the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Richard had bought it before he died, tucked inside a brown paper bag from a small craft store in Lancaster, with the receipt folded neatly on top. He had always folded receipts. Grocery receipts, gas receipts, little notes from the hardware store. He said a man who kept small things in order had a better chance of keeping the big things honest. On the bag, in his careful handwriting, he had written, "For our first granddaughter." When the time comes. I sat on the edge of the bed for nearly 20 minutes after I found it. The house was quiet except for the heater clicking through the vents and a dog barking somewhere down the street. Richard had been gone almost 2 years by then, but grief does not leave a house all at once. It hides in drawers, in coat pockets, in handwriting on paper bags. I held that yarn against my chest and could almost hear him in the kitchen, asking if I wanted coffee even though he already knew I did. The next morning, I began the blanket. At first, I told myself it was just something to keep my hands busy. Winter in Pennsylvania can make a widow feel smaller than she is. The days turn gray by 4:30, the sidewalks glaze over, and the silence after supper can stretch so wide it feels like another room. So I knitted, one row after another, cream through my fingers, pale blue along the edge. I followed the same pattern my mother had used when I was born, the same pattern I used for Daniel when we brought him home from the hospital, wrapped so tightly he looked like a little loaf of bread. But Richard had left more than yarn. Inside the same cedar chest, under his old wool scarf, was a sealed envelope with my name on it. I had not opened it right away. I knew his handwriting, and I knew my own heart. When I finally did, I found a short note, a smaller envelope wrapped in plastic, and a tiny brass key taped to a square of cardboard. His note said that if Daniel ever had a daughter, I was to sew the smaller envelope and the key into the blanket's border before giving it to the baby. He wrote, "Do not explain it before the gift is received. Let love arrive first. The truth can follow." That was Richard. Careful, sentimental and private, strategic when it mattered. I did exactly as he asked. I stitched the envelope and key into the thickest part of the blue border, so neatly that no one would notice unless they were looking for a secret. I planned to tell Daniel after the shower, maybe in the kitchen, maybe when Lauren was busy with guests and he had one quiet minute too. Remember the kind of family he came from. I had imagined him holding the blanket, finding the hidden seam, smiling through tears when he realized his father had still found a way to welcome Claire. I had not imagined my daughter-in-law dropping it into a trash can between paper plates and frosting-stained napkins. I had not imagined my son letting her do it. Daniel kept asking the same question through the phone, his voice breaking around every word. "Mom, please. What was inside it?" I closed my eyes. I could see Richard's note on my lap. I could see the little brass key. I could see Lauren's polished hand pinching the corner of the blanket as if love itself had offended her. "Your father," I said quietly. Daniel stopped crying for 1 second. Only one. Then I heard him inhale like the floor had disappeared beneath him. "What do you mean?" he whispered. I looked toward the dark living room, toward the empty chair where Richard used to read the Sunday paper, and my answer came out softer than I expected. "I mean, your father kept his last promise to your daughter. And today, Daniel, you let someone throw it away." After Daniel went silent, I did not fill the space for him. I had spent too many years doing that, softening hard moments so my son would not have to feel them. When he was little, I explained away disappointments. When Richard missed a baseball game because a client meeting ran late, I told Daniel his father had tried. When college broke his heart the first time, I made soup and pretended not to notice him crying into the sleeve of his sweatshirt. When he married Lauren, I told myself distance was natural. A man leaves his mother and builds his own home. That is what I said every time Sunday calls became 5-minute conversations from the car, every time Thanksgiving plans changed after I had already bought the turkey, every time Lauren smiled in public and closed doors in private. She had not pushed me out all at once. That would have been too obvious. Lauren was smarter than that. She moved like fog under a door. Quiet. Soft. Everywhere before you noticed the room had changed. The first Christmas after she and Daniel married, she told me they wanted a small holiday, just the two of them, because Daniel was exhausted from work. I spent Christmas morning eating toast at my kitchen table, trying not to look at the extra stockings still packed in tissue paper. That evening, my neighbor showed me photos Lauren had posted online. Daniel was in a red sweater beside a 12-foot tree, surrounded by her parents, cousins, friends, and people I had never met. The caption said, "Nothing matters more than family." I stared at that word for a long time. Family. The next year, when Daniel turned 40, I baked his favorite coconut cake and drove 40 miles to their house with it balanced on the passenger seat. Lauren met me at the door, her hand on the frame, her smile bright enough to warn me. "Oh, Margaret, I am so sorry. We celebrated last night. Daniel forgot to tell you." Behind her, I could see balloons still hanging over the dining room, empty wine glasses on the sideboard, and a stack of gifts on the floor. Daniel came down the stairs and looked genuinely startled to see me. That hurt more than if he had planned it. He hugged me with one arm and said, "Mom, you should have called first." I had called. Twice. Lauren had answered both times. Then came the doctor appointments. The first ultrasound. The nursery planning. The baby registry. Every small doorway into Claire's life was closed before I reached it. Lauren told me they wanted to keep things low stress. She told me modern parenting was different. She told me homemade blankets could carry dust, old recipes had too much sugar, and babies did not need too many voices confusing the routine. Always polite enough that if I repeated her words, I sounded petty. Always sharp enough that I felt the cut for days. Daniel never said, "Stop." He said, "She does not mean it that way." He said, "Please do not take everything personally." He said, "Can we just have one peaceful visit?" Peaceful. That was the word he used whenever I was expected to swallow something painful. At the shower, when Lauren held up the blanket, I already knew what her face would do. The little lift of her eyebrow. The pause before saying my name. The way she made kindness look embarrassing. But I had still hoped Daniel would step forward. Just once. One hand on his wife's arm. One sentence. "Lauren, do not." He did not. He looked at the floor, and in that downward glance I saw years of surrender. Not cruelty. Cowardice. There is a difference, but the wound feels almost the same. On the phone that night, I could hear Lauren in the background asking him something. Her voice was tight, not worried, only irritated that a problem had appeared after the guests left. Daniel muffled the phone, then came back breathing hard. "Mom, I did not know," he said. I looked at the leftover strands of yarn in my basket. "No," I answered. "You did not know what was inside, but you knew what she was doing." He tried to speak, then stopped. That was the first honest thing he had done all day. Silence, when it is no longer an escape, can finally become a mirror. By the time Daniel understood that I was not going to soften the truth for him, Lauren had taken the phone from his hand. I knew it before she spoke. The air on the line changed. Daniel's breathing faded, and in its place came the clean, controlled voice she used whenever she wanted to sound reasonable in front of witnesses. "Margaret," she said, "I think everyone is getting a little emotional over a misunderstanding." I sat down slowly in Richard's old reading chair. The cushion still dipped on the left side where his elbow used to rest. "A misunderstanding," I repeated. "Yes," Lauren said, and I could almost see her standing in that perfect kitchen, one hand on her hip, the trash can probably already wiped clean. I did not realize the blanket was sentimental. "You should have said something before bringing it. You know we are being careful about what comes into the nursery." Careful. The words settled between us like dust. She had not been careful with my hands, or Richard's memory, or the 4 months of quiet labor stitched into that border. She had been careful only with appearances. I remembered the baby shower invitation when it arrived in the mail, pale pink with gold lettering, formal enough for a stranger. Not a phone call from my son. Not a warm message from my daughter-in-law. Just a card telling me where to be and when to smile. I remembered walking into their house that afternoon and noticing my seat was near the hallway, half blocked by a potted fiddle leaf figure. Lauren's mother sat beside her in the center of the room. Her friends circled close with cameras. I was placed where I could watch, but not belong. When one of Daniel's co-workers asked who I was, Lauren answered, "That is Daniel's mom, Margaret. She is very traditional." The woman nodded politely, as if traditional meant fragile, outdated, best handled gently, and kept out of the way. Later, when I touched Lauren's arm and said Claire was already so loved, she stepped back just enough for me to notice. Not enough for anyone else. That was Lauren's talent. She could humiliate a woman in movements too small to accuse. A pause. A glance. A laugh placed half a second after a sincere sentence. By the time she opened my gift, the room had already been trained to see me through her eyes. Old-fashioned. Emotional. Unnecessary. So when she lifted the blanket and smiled with pity, they were ready to laugh. When she carried it to the kitchen, no one stopped her because they thought they were watching a harmless family awkwardness. But I saw the truth. Lauren was not rejecting a blanket. She was making an announcement. There would be no handmade history in her nursery. No grandmother's pattern. No grandfather's blessing. No place for anything that existed before her. "It was not a misunderstanding," I said. My voice was low, almost tired. "You wanted me to feel small in front of your guests." The line went quiet for 2 beats. Then Lauren gave a soft laugh. "That is dramatic." There it was. The little word she kept ready for me. Dramatic, whenever I noticed. Sensitive, whenever I remembered. Difficult, whenever I refused to disappear politely. I looked at the framed photo of Richard on the side table. He was standing on Cape May Beach in his old windbreaker, smiling into the sun, one hand raised as if he had just spotted me behind the camera. Richard had seen things clearly, perhaps more clearly than I had wanted to admit. That was why he had hidden the key. That was why he had written instructions instead of trusting good intentions. "Put Daniel back on the phone," I said. Lauren's voice sharpened. If there was something valuable in that blanket, you need to tell us right now. Us. Not the baby. Not Daniel. Us. And in that one word, I heard the sound of her mask slipping. No, I said. I need to tell my son. Not you. For once, Lauren had no polished answer. I heard movement, a muffled argument. Daniel saying her name in a voice I had not heard from him in years, firm and shaken at the same time. Then he came back on the line. Mom, he whispered. I closed my eyes and saw the blue border of the blanket, the hidden seam, the small brass key waiting in darkness among frosting-stained plates and party napkins. Daniel, I said, your father did not leave that key for Lauren to find in a trash bag. He left it for Claire, and he trusted me to make sure it reached her only if this family remembered what respect looked like. Daniel did not ask about money first. That mattered to me, though I was too hurt to say so. He asked where the blanket might be, whether the trash had been taken out, whether the city pickup had already come, whether there was any chance it was still in the bin behind the garage. I could hear him moving through the house, doors opening, plastic bags rustling, Lauren's voice rising and falling behind him like a radio in another room. The outside bins were emptied this afternoon, he said at last, each word thinner than the one before. After the party, Lauren asked me to roll them to the curb because they were full. I pictured him doing it without thinking, one more small act of obedience disguised as household routine. The blanket had not simply been thrown away. It had been carried out by my own son. I let that thought settle where it belonged. Not as punishment, as fact. Then you know where to start, I said. Mom, the truck came hours ago. Then call the waste company. He was quiet. Daniel had spent his adult life in clean offices with glass walls and polished conference tables. He managed budgets, investments, and people who wore expensive shoes. He was not used to chasing something precious after it had been discarded. What exactly was in it? He asked again, but softer this time, as if he already knew the answer would cost him. I looked down at my hands. The knuckles were swollen from age, the fingertips rough from yarn and years of washing dishes, folding laundry, tying shoelaces, signing school forms, holding Richard's hand in the hospital until the nurse told me visiting hours did not matter anymore. These hands had made a home. Lauren had looked at their work and seen garbage. There were 3 things inside the border, I said. A letter from your father to Claire. A letter from your father to you. And a key. Daniel's breathing changed. A key to what? From the other side of his phone, Lauren's voice cut in, sharp enough that I knew she had moved closer. Daniel, ask her if this is about a safe. There it was. Not sorrow. Not shame. A safe. Daniel did not repeat her question. That also mattered. A safe deposit box, I said. At Keystone Community Bank. Your father arranged it before he passed. Daniel made a sound I could not name. Richard had banked there for 30 years. Same brick building on Main Street. Same brass door handles. Same little bowl of peppermint candies by the teller window. He used to say loyalty still counted in small towns, even when the rest of the world forgot. What is in the box? Daniel asked. Documents, I said. For a lake cottage near Raystown. Your father bought it quietly years ago. He wanted it protected for the first granddaughter in our family, Claire. The silence that followed was different from all the others. Bigger. Lauren stopped talking. I could almost hear her calculating. Property. Water. Inheritance. Control. The words were probably lining up in her mind like numbers on a spreadsheet. Claire has a house. Daniel whispered. Claire has a future your father tried to place beyond selfish hands, I said. The cottage is not yours. It is not Lauren's. It is held for Claire, with conditions. What conditions? He asked. I stood and walked to the window. Across the street, porch lights glowed in neat little squares. Somewhere, a car passed over wet pavement. Life outside my grief remained ordinary, which seemed almost insulting. The most important condition is simple, I said. Until Claire is 25, the property cannot be sold, borrowed against, or used by either parent without my approval as trustee. Daniel exhaled my name like a prayer and an apology together. Then Lauren spoke again, no longer pretending she was not listening. That is ridiculous. She cannot control something meant for our child. Our child. Not Claire. Not the baby. Our child. As if motherhood gave her the right to erase everyone who came before her. I did not raise my voice. Richard had taught me long ago that the person who stays calm usually owns the room, even over the phone. Lauren, I said, you threw away the only key in your possession before you knew what it opened. That is not my fault. Daniel whispered. Mom, what do I do? For years, I would have rescued him from the full weight of that question. I would have made calls, driven across town, fixed the damage quietly, and let him return to comfort without understanding the cost. Not tonight. You call the waste company, I said. You find out where that truck went. And tomorrow morning, Daniel, you go there yourself. He hesitated. To the landfill? Yes. My voice did not tremble. If you could carry your mother's gift to the curb, you can carry yourself to where it ended up. Daniel called the waste company before midnight. I stayed on the line while he searched for the emergency number on the city website, his voice uneven as he explained that an item of family importance had been taken during the afternoon pickup. The man who answered must have heard panic before, because he did not laugh and he did not rush. He asked for the address, the time the bins had been collected, and whether the trash had been mixed with the general residential route. Daniel repeated everything, then fell quiet while the man checked the route log. I sat at my kitchen table with one lamp on, the same table where Richard and I used to sort bills on Sunday nights. My tea had gone cold. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window, turning the streetlights into blurred yellow circles. Lauren had stopped speaking in the background. That worried me more than her anger. Lauren. Quiet meant Lauren thinking. Finally, Daniel came back. The truck was unloaded at the transfer station outside town, he said. Not the landfill yet. They said if I get there when they open, there is a chance they can isolate the load from our neighborhood. A chance. Such a small word for something that carried a dead man's last tenderness. Then be there when they open, I said. He hesitated, and I knew before he spoke what the hesitation meant. Lauren thinks we should call an attorney first. I almost smiled. Not because anything was funny, but because the pattern was so plain now it had become almost insulting. An attorney cannot dig through trash for you, Daniel. He drew in a breath. She says if the documents are real, we need to understand our rights. Her rights? I asked. He did not answer. I looked at Richard's photo across the room. In the frame, his smile seemed patient, as if he had been waiting for this night longer than I had. Daniel, listen to me carefully. That cottage was never meant to become a prize for whoever could grab it first. Your father protected it because he understood that love without boundaries can be picked apart by greedy hands. My son was silent again, but this time it was not empty. It was full of things he was finally beginning to hear. Mom, he said, will you come with me? The question arrived softly, almost like a child asking if the dark hallway was safe. My first instinct was to say yes, because that is what mothers do. We step into cold mornings, hospital rooms, school offices, and all kinds of hard places so our children do not have to stand alone. But then I remembered the living room at the shower. The way Daniel had looked down while Lauren carried my work away. The way he had chosen silence and called it peace. I will meet you there, I said, but I will not do the searching for you. He swallowed hard. I understand. I was not sure he did, but it was the first time in years he had tried to. After we ended the call, I did not sleep. I changed into jeans, a thick sweater, and Richard's old raincoat, the tan one that still smelled faintly of cedar and winter air. At 5:30 in the morning, I drove 22 miles through wet back roads toward the transfer station. The sky was still dark, the kind of dark that makes every porch light look lonely. When I arrived, Daniel was already there, standing near the office gate in his expensive wool coat and polished shoes, looking completely out of place against the concrete, mud, and metal dumpsters. His hair was uncombed. His eyes were red. For once, he did not look like a man managing a situation. He looked like a son who had lost something and did not know whether he deserved to find it. Lauren was not with him. I parked beside his car and stepped out slowly. The air smelled like rain, diesel, and yesterday's mistakes. Daniel looked at me and started to speak, but I lifted one hand. Not harshly, just enough. Not yet, I said. Find the blanket first. The station manager, a broad man named Mr. Alvarez, met us at the gate with a clipboard and a tired but kind expression. He said they had held the section from Daniel's neighborhood aside, but we had to wear gloves, boots, and reflective vests. Daniel looked at the pile beyond the fence, then at his shoes. Something passed across his face. Shame, maybe. Reality, certainly. He took the gloves. So did I. For the next 2 hours, my son searched through what his household had thrown away. Party cups, gift wrap, wilted flowers, pink napkins smeared with frosting. Every cheerful little remnant of the day I had been pushed out. He worked without complaint. Once, he found a piece of pale blue ribbon and froze, but it was only ribbon from a gift bag. Once, he turned away and pressed his sleeve to his face. I pretended not to see. Some lessons need privacy, even when they happen in ugly places. Then, near the bottom of a torn black trash bag, I saw cream yarn darken with moisture. Daniel saw it at the same time. He dropped to one knee in the mud and reached for it with shaking hands. The blanket came free slowly, stained, wet, and heavy, but whole. The pale blue border was still intact. Daniel held it against his chest, as if it were Claire herself. His face crumpled, but he made no sound. I stood beside him in the gray morning and looked at the thing. Lauren had tried to erase. It was dirty, yes, but it was not destroyed. Neither was I. We brought the blanket back to my townhouse because Daniel's house no longer felt like a safe place for it. He drove behind me the whole way, close enough that I could see his headlights in my rearview mirror, but not so close that I felt crowded. That was new for him, giving me space without being asked. The morning had turned pale and cold by the time we arrived. Rainwater clung to the bare maple branches along my street, and the lawns looked flattened by winter. Daniel carried the blanket inside with both hands, wrapped in a clean plastic liner Mr. Alvarez had given us, as if even in its ruined state it deserved gentleness. He paused in my entryway, looking around the small home he had not visited in almost 8 months. His eyes moved over the framed school pictures on the wall, the old brass lamp from his childhood bedroom, Richard's navy umbrella still leaning beside the coat closet. Maybe he expected dust. Maybe loneliness. What he found was order. A life still standing without his permission. "Kitchen," I said. He followed me like a boy. I filled the sink with cool water and a little wool-safe soap, then opened the plastic carefully. The smell of the transfer station rose for a second, sour and damp, and Daniel flinched. I did not. There are things a mother should never have to wash from a gift. But if life has taught me anything, it is that dignity often returns through small, patient work. I lowered the blanket into the water. Cream yarn darkened beneath my fingers. Pink frosting loosened from one corner. A smear of mud lifted from the blue border. Daniel stood beside the table, useless and ashamed, until I handed him a clean towel. "Fold it flat," I said. His hands shook as he obeyed. For half an hour, we washed and rinsed in silence. Not the old silence, the one he used to hide inside. This silence had weight. It was doing something. When the water finally ran clear, I pressed the blanket between towels and laid it across the drying rack in the laundry room, where warm air from the vent moved gently through the space. The blue border was still swollen with the hidden seam. I touched it once, then turned to Daniel. "Sit down." He sat at the kitchen table where he had done his homework as a child while visiting after school, back when I still lived in the larger house Richard and I sold before retirement. I brought out my sewing basket, the small silver scissors, and the copy of Richard's instructions I had kept in my bedside drawer. Daniel watched every movement. I did not hurry. Some truths deserve to arrive slowly, so no one can pretend they did not see them coming. I snipped 3 tiny stitches from the inside of the border and worked my fingers carefully through the damp yarn. First came the plastic-wrapped envelope, then the small cardboard square with the brass key taped to it. The key had darkened slightly, but it was there. Richard's last little act of preparation, rescued from beneath coffee grounds and party trash. Daniel covered his mouth. "Dad did that," he whispered. "Your father did many things quietly," I said. "You were too busy to notice at the end." It was not meant to wound him, but it did. The truth often sounds unkind when it has been waiting too long. I handed him the first envelope, the one marked Daniel in Richard's square, careful handwriting. He stared at his name as if it belonged to someone better. "Read it," I said. His fingers slid under the seal. The paper unfolded with a soft sound that seemed too delicate for the morning we had just survived. Daniel read the first line and stopped breathing for a moment. His eyes filled before he reached the second paragraph. I did not ask what it said. I already knew. Richard had shown me a copy before he sealed it. He had written about Daniel's first steps across our old living room carpet, about teaching him how to hold a fishing rod at Raystown Lake, about the night Daniel called from college because he was scared he would fail an exam, and Richard told him that character was not built by never falling short, but by what a man protected when he was afraid. Then came the sentence I knew would break him. Daniel read it aloud in a voice scraped raw. If your mother ever has to beg for a place in your life, then I failed to teach you what love means. The room went still. Even the heater seemed to pause. Daniel bent over the letter, one hand pressed to his eyes, and for the first time that day, I did not see a successful man or a weak husband. I saw my son, not innocent, not excused, but finally awake. Daniel read the letter twice. The first time, he cried like a son. The second time, he read like a man being handed a map back to himself. I sat across from him with my hands around a mug of coffee I had not tasted, watching his face change line by line. Richard had not written with anger. That was what made it harder to bear. He had written with love, with disappointment held back by hope, with the steady voice of a father who knew he might not be present when his son most needed correction. Daniel reached the final page and pressed the paper flat against the table as if he were afraid it might vanish. He knew, he said. He knew I was letting this happen. I looked toward the laundry room where the blanket rested over the drying rack, cleaner now, but not untouched. Some stains lift. Some remain faintly, not to ruin a thing, but to remind you what it survived. Your father noticed more than people thought, I said. Daniel stared at the brass key beside his elbow. And the cottage? I opened the second folder from Richard's envelope and slid the documents across the table. There was the deed record, the trust paperwork, the bank instructions, and Richard's letter to Claire, still sealed because that belonged to her someday, not to the adults who had already made enough of a mess. Daniel flipped through the pages slowly. He knew enough about finance to understand what he was seeing. The lake cottage near Raystown was real. Modest, not grand, 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, a narrow dock, and a line of pine trees bending toward the water. Richard had bought it before prices climbed, back when he still took Daniel fishing there on cool April mornings. He had titled it into a trust for the first granddaughter of the Ellis family, with me as trustee until Claire turned 25. Daniel read the clause about access and swallowed hard. Neither parent may sell, borrow against, lease, occupy, or materially alter the property without trustee approval, he said. That is you. Yes. Lauren is going to lose her mind. I did not answer immediately. I watched steam rise from my coffee in a thin white thread. There was a time when I would have cared deeply about Lauren's reaction. I would have planned my words, softened the edges, tried to make the truth comfortable enough for her to accept. That woman had raised a family on compromise. This woman had watched her son pull a blanket from trash. Lauren's feelings are not the center of this, I said. Daniel looked ashamed again, but he did not look away. I made them the center, he said. For years. The admission sat between us. Small, heavy, necessary. His phone had been buzzing on the table for almost an hour. Lauren's name flashed again and again, sometimes followed by short messages that lit the screen before fading. Where are you? Answer me. We need to talk before your mother twists this. Daniel turned the phone face down. It was not a grand gesture. No music swelled. No door slammed. Just a grown man placing one rectangle of glass against a wooden table. But I felt the shift. I have to go home, he said. Yes, I answered. You do. He folded Richard's letter carefully and held it for a moment against his chest. Can I take this? It was written for you. He nodded, then glanced toward the laundry room. And the key? I picked up the brass key and closed my fingers around it. The key stays with me. Pain crossed his face, but he accepted it. That mattered too. Before he left, he stopped in the doorway and looked back at me. In the weak afternoon light, I could see the boy he had been and the man he had failed to be, both standing there in the same tired body. Mom, he said, I am sorry I let her make you feel like you were extra. Extra. The word landed deep because it was exactly what Lauren had taught him to think without ever saying it plainly. Extra chair. Extra call. Extra visit. Extra burden. I stood by the kitchen sink, my hands damp from washing his daughter's blanket, and I did not rush to forgive him just so he could feel lighter. You did not let her make me feel that way, I said. You made me feel that way when you agreed with her silence. His eyes filled again. He nodded once. No excuse. No defense. Then he left. Through the front window, I watched him sit in his car for a long time before starting the engine. I knew he was going back to a house where Lauren would be waiting with polished anger and careful words. I also knew something had changed before he even turned onto the street. He had left my home without the key, without control, and without the shelter of pretending he had not understood. That was enough for one day. Daniel told me later that Lauren was waiting in the kitchen when he came home, dressed in the same cream sweater from the shower, her makeup still perfect except for the tightness around her mouth. The house had been cleaned so thoroughly that no sign of the party remained. No balloons, no paper plates, no empty gift bags. It was as if she believed removing evidence could remove meaning. She asked where he had been, then answered herself before he could speak. With your mother, obviously. Daniel placed Richard's letter on the counter. Not the trust documents. Not the key. Just the letter. I was with my mother, he said. And I should have been with her yesterday too. Lauren laughed once, a short sound without warmth. So now she has turned you against me with a dirty blanket and a sob story. Daniel did not raise his voice. That was how I knew the change was real. Men who are still unsure often shout to convince themselves. Daniel spoke quietly. She gave our daughter a legacy. You threw it away because you wanted to embarrass her. Lauren denied it at first. Then she reshaped it. Then she blamed me. She said I had always tried to make her feel judged. She said I wanted control over Claire. She said homemade gifts were manipulative because they made people feel obligated to be grateful. Daniel listened until she ran out of polished sentences. Then he asked one question. If you thought it was only a blanket, why did you ask whether there was money inside? Lauren went still. There are silences that protect people, and there are silences that expose them. Hers did the second. By Monday morning, Daniel and I were sitting across from Mr. Collins, the attorney who had handled Richard's estate. His office smelled faintly of leather, printer paper, and peppermint candy from the dish near his receptionist's desk. I wore a gray cardigan and carried the brass key in my purse. Daniel sat beside me, not ahead of me, not speaking over me, not explaining me away. Mr. Collins reviewed the trust papers and confirmed what Richard had already made plain. The Raystown cottage belonged to Claire's trust. I was the trustee. No sale, loan, renovation, rental, or family use could happen without my written approval. I signed the additional protection forms that morning, not out of revenge, out of memory, out of duty, out of the calm understanding that love without safeguards can be taken by people who mistake kindness for weakness. Lauren called Daniel 17 times while we were in that office. He did not answer. Later that week, he told her the trust was locked and that my place in Claire's life was not negotiable. She was not pleased. I was no longer interested in being liked by a woman who needed me invisible to feel secure. 3 weeks later, Claire was born at a hospital outside Harrisburg on a cold, clear morning. Daniel called me himself. His voice shook, but this time it was not fear. Mom, he said, your granddaughter is here. I drove carefully, the cleaned blanket folded on the passenger seat, cream and blue, softer than it had any right to be after what it had survived. When I entered the hospital room, Lauren looked away, tired and pale, holding a silence I did not try to fix. Daniel stood beside the bassinet. He had been crying. He did not apologize again in front of everyone. He simply stepped aside so I could see Claire. She was tiny, red-cheeked, wrapped in a plain hospital blanket, her little mouth moving as if she were dreaming of milk. I touched one finger to her hand, and she curled around it with surprising strength. Daniel unfolded the blanket and placed it gently over her. For a moment, Richard felt so close that I almost turned to make room for him. I bent over my granddaughter and whispered, "You were loved before you arrived, little one. Your grandfather made sure you would always have a place, and I made sure no one could throw it away again." Daniel stood behind me, quiet. Lauren said nothing. For once, no one corrected me, minimized me, or asked me to step aside. I did not mistake that moment for a perfect ending. Families do not heal in one hospital room. Sons do not repair years of silence with one phone call. But as Claire slept beneath the blanket that had been pulled from the trash and washed back into dignity, I understood something Richard had known all along. Some things are only lost if no one is willing to go back and claim them.